Kentucky, early 1950s. The sun beat down on the dusty road as Samuel Carter rode his old mare toward the small town of Harlan Creek. He wasn't there for trouble, just needed to trade some tools and buy salt for the cattle. But what he saw in the town square stopped him cold. A group of men had gathered near the feed store. They were laughing loudly, drinking and jeering. Up on a flatbed truck, a young woman stood barefoot, her dress torn at the hem and a bruise darkening one cheek. Her wrists were tied in front with coarse rope. She didn't cry, didn't speak, just stared out over the crowd like she wasn't really there. A bloated man with greasy hair and a bottle in hand shoved her shoulder roughly. "This one here's no good to me," he yelled. "My wife ran off, left me with this mouthy brat. I'm tired of feeding her. $50 and she's yours." Samuel had seen a lot in his time. Wars, sickness, loss. But something about the way that girl stood still, silent, unbroken, did something to him. He slid off his saddle slowly, walked through the crowd and said, "I'll take her." The drunk man squinted at him. "You? Why? What's it to you?" Samuel opened the flap of his coat and pulled out a small leather pouch. $50, that's what you said, right? The man laughed bitterly. "She's got nothing, just that attitude." "Good," said Samuel. "Then I won't have to carry much." He handed over the pouch, stepped up to the girl, and pulled a pocket knife from his belt. He cut the rope from her wrists. She didn't flinch, didn't thank him. But she looked at him, really looked, and that was enough. "What's your name?" he asked as he mounted his horse again. "Emily," she said quietly. "Emily Harris." They rode out of Harlan Creek before sunset. She rode behind him on the second horse, her arms wrapped around herself, eyes fixed on the fading hills. Samuel didn't say much. He wasn't a man who liked to fill silence. His wife, Margaret, had passed 3 years earlier, taken by fever after their second child. The words had left with her. Now he had 2 children waiting back at the farm, and now Emily too. After nearly 3 hours on the trail, she finally spoke. "You bought me." He nodded. "I did. Why?" He looked at her from the corner of his eye. She sat straight, despite the bruises. "Because you needed a way out, and I had the means." She looked down at her hands, red where the rope had burned. "What if I run?" "You can." "You won't stop me?" "No." She went quiet again. Then, softer. "What's your name?" "Samuel Carter." She looked at him again. "Thank you, Mr. Carter." The rest of the ride was spent in silence, the kind that didn't feel heavy. At dawn, they reached the farm. A modest wooden house sat near the tree line, sturdy and quiet. Chickens scratched around the yard. 2 small children burst out the front door barefoot. Sarah, 5, clung to his leg, while Jacob, 7, froze when he saw the stranger. "Who's that?" he asked. Samuel bent down. "This is Miss Emily Harris. She'll be staying with us for a little while. Mind your manners." Emily crouched slowly, the bruises on her face softening slightly. "Hello," she said gently. Sarah stared at her. "Are you going to be our new mama?" Samuel's heart tensed. Emily blinked and reached out to tuck a curl behind the girl's ear. "No, sweetheart, I'm just a guest." The days that followed settled into a rhythm. Samuel worked the cattle and mended the barn roof. Emily cleaned what needed cleaning, cooked when she could, and never raised her voice. Her silence wasn't fear, it was armor. But slowly, her shoulders began to relax. She started humming while she chopped onions. Sarah followed her like a shadow. Even Jacob, cautious and skeptical, began sitting near her on the porch in the evenings. One night after supper, Samuel watched her brush Sarah's hair while the child dozed against her leg. "You're good with them," he said. She looked up. "I raised my baby sister from the time I was 12. She was more mine than my mama's in the end." "You miss her?" Emily nodded. "She died of the fever. Then my daddy drank himself into ruin and married me off to that man. I was 16. Samuel's jaw tightened. I'm sorry. You didn't know. He stepped forward, leaned against the doorway. You can stay as long as you like. I won't ask anything of you. Emily looked down at Sarah, now asleep in her lap. Her voice was soft. You already gave me more than anyone ever has. Samuel left her alone after that, but he didn't sleep that night. The next morning, he found her kneeling by the creek, scrubbing clothes in the cold water. He walked down from the porch, rifle on his back. You don't have to do all that. I want to. He hesitated, then sat beside her on the rocks. You're not used to anyone taking care of you, are you? She shook her head. No one ever has. He picked up a shirt and wrung it out next to her. Maybe it's time someone did. She looked at him, surprised, but didn't look away, and in her eyes something new stirred. Not fear, not defense, something close to hope. The days moved slowly on the Carter farm, steady as the turning of the seasons. Emily began to settle in, not with grand gestures, but in small ways. A clean dish, a swept porch, a loaf of bread baked early before sunrise. She asked for nothing. She spoke little, but her presence grew roots, quiet and firm. Sarah followed her like a chick after a hen. She showed Emily her favorite flowers, told her secrets, brought her buttons and feathers like gifts. Jacob still watched from a distance, quiet, guarded. But one afternoon, he sat down beside her on the porch without a word and handed her a peeled apple. Emily accepted it with a nod and a soft, "Thank you." He didn't answer, but he stayed. Samuel noticed everything. He didn't comment, but he watched the way the children gravitated toward her, the way Emily began to hum while shelling peas, or how she sometimes looked out at the hills as if trying to believe they were real. One evening, Samuel returned from the barn and found all three of them around the kitchen table. Emily was teaching Sarah a song, her voice low and sweet. Jacob tapped the rhythm on the wood. Samuel stood in the doorway and just listened. Something deep inside him, quiet for years, stirred. Later that night, he brought 2 mugs of coffee to the porch and sat beside her. "You've brought a calm to this house," he said. Emily didn't look at him. "You brought me safety. That's a fair trade." The next morning, she asked if she could go with him to check the north fence line. "I want to help," she said. He hesitated but nodded. They rode out before dawn. The frost still clung to the grass and the air was sharp in their lungs. Emily rode steadily, holding the reins like she'd done it 100 times. She didn't speak until they were halfway across the pasture. "How long have you lived on this land?" "Bought it in '45, right after the war. It was brush and rocks back then. Margaret and I built the house with our own hands." Emily nodded slowly. She must have been strong. "She was, fierce and kind, lost her to fever, same as your folks, sounds like." They paused at the ridge, the rising sun lighting the hills gold. "Did you ever dream of leaving?" she asked. "No. This land's honest. You give it care. It gives you back something solid." Emily smiled faintly. "That's all I ever wanted." They rode in silence for a while. At the broken post, Samuel dismounted. While he worked, Emily held the reins and watched a hawk circle overhead. "You ever seen the ocean?" he asked suddenly. "No, but my mama used to sing about it. She was from the east. Said the air tasted like salt and the wind always moved." "You still hear her?" Emily nodded. "In lullabies, in how I braid my hair, always from the left, just like she did." That evening, she sat on the porch mending a tear in Jacob's shirt. Samuel brought her a fresh tin cup of coffee and watched her thread the needle with slow precision. Jacob asked if you could read stories like his school teacher used to. "I can," she said, not looking up. "Mama taught me. I read everything I could get my hands on." "Maybe you could help him. He's smart, but he struggles with letters." "I'd like that." The porch grew quiet, filled only with the hum of crickets. Samuel leaned back in his chair, hands resting on his knees. "You ever think about what comes next?" Emily paused. "I used to, all the time, but now, I'm not sure I want to look too far ahead." "Why not?" She looked at him, steady. "Because I don't want to leave." He didn't answer, just reached over and gently tucked a loose strand of hair behind her ear. She didn't pull away. Inside, Sarah stirred in her sleep. Emily rose and went inside. Later, Samuel found her sitting by the stove, her hands quiet in her lap. "I keep waiting for this to disappear," she said softly. "It won't." "How can you be sure?" "Because you're not the only one who feels it." She stood, reached for his hand, and held it. Then she let go and climbed the stairs. Samuel remained still, the warmth of her fingers lingering in his palm. The next morning, Emily was in the cellar organizing jars and root vegetables. Her sleeves were rolled to the elbow, her hair tied back in a braid. She hummed softly, an unfamiliar tune but calm. When Samuel entered, she looked up and smiled. A real one. "What is it?" he asked. "I was thinking I might start teaching Sarah her numbers." She'd like that. The days grew colder. They worked side by side. She dried herbs. He stacked firewood. The children laughed more. Emily's footsteps became part of the house. Not as a guest, but as something permanent. One morning, a knock came at the door. A man stood on the porch, tall, sharp-eyed, with a worn jacket and a face like scraped leather. "I'm Merritt," he said. "Looking for a man named Carter. He the one who bought you off my cousin in Harlan Creek?" Emily stiffened. "He's not home. What do you want?" Merritt stepped forward. "Family don't forget. I came to collect." "There's nothing owed," she said evenly. "Not to you, not to anyone." He reached for her, but before he could touch her, the back door slammed open. Samuel stepped in, rifle slung but ready. "Let go of her." Merritt froze. "Ain't here for trouble. You brought it anyway. Leave, now." Merritt hesitated, then stepped back and spat on the porch. "She ain't worth the fight." He left. Samuel walked over and touched her face. "Are you all right?" She nodded, though her hands trembled. He won't be back. Winter crept in early that year. Frost clung to the fence rails, and the morning light came slower each day. Inside the Carter farmhouse, warmth came from more than the fire. It came from shared routines, soft glances, the way Emily taught Sarah to thread a needle, or how Jacob leaned into her shoulder during reading time. But the peace they had built was fragile. The visit from Merritt left a shadow behind. Samuel began walking the property more often, rifle slung over his shoulder. Emily kept a carving knife closer than before. Not out of fear, but caution. She knew what men like Merritt could become when they felt powerless. Still, life carried on. One morning, while peeling carrots at the kitchen sink, Emily heard the front door creak. Jacob stood there, a small splinter in his hand and a hesitant look in his eyes. "Miss Emily, can I ask you something?" "Of course." "Did you ever ride in a wagon train?" She smiled. "No, but I walked beside one for 5 days once, long time ago." "Mr. Wilkes at church says everyone out west came that way, that everybody's got some kind of story." Emily nodded slowly. "Some did, some didn't. Not all stories follow the same road." That night, Samuel found her folding blankets by the hearth. He leaned against the doorway, arms crossed. "I saw how you talked to Jacob. He's starting to ask deeper questions. He trusts me. Both of them do." Samuel stepped closer. "And so do I." She looked down at her hands. "I've been thinking about winter, about staying." His voice was quiet. "You can. No one's asking you to go." "I want to help more, not just housework. I can preserve food, store herbs, plan ahead. You don't need permission. I lived too long under someone who made every effort feel like a debt. I need to know this is something I'm building, not borrowing." Samuel reached for her hand. Then we build it together. The next morning, Emily began clearing space in the root cellar. She arranged the shelves, sorted the potatoes, labeled jars of honey and pickles. She hummed as she worked, no longer the humming of habit, but of peace. Later that week, a neighbor rode up. Wyatt Henderson, who ran the feed store, handed Samuel a letter from the county council and a small bag of seeds. Land dispute out west of the ridge. They're asking folks to show up and speak. Some new ranchers think they can stretch boundaries. Samuel nodded. I'll ride out. Wyatt's eyes flicked toward Emily, who stood on the porch with Sarah. That your new housekeeper? Samuel didn't miss a beat. She's part of this family. That's all I needed to know. Wyatt tipped his hat and rode off. That evening, Emily sat on the porch steps, arms wrapped around her knees. Samuel joined her, lowering himself slowly beside her. I'm sorry for how he spoke. I've heard worse, but thank you. He looked out across the field, the barn light glowing softly in the dark. I don't want anyone thinking you're less than what you are. She turned to him. And what am I? Strong, capable, and more than I deserve. She reached for his hand. You don't get to decide that. I do. And I choose this. His voice caught slightly. So do I. In the days that followed, Emily taught Sarah to spin yarn while Samuel repaired the barn roof. Jacob carved wooden buttons and brought them to her in a cloth pouch. Their lives unfolded in quiet rituals, each act a thread in something solid. One evening, after the first snow dusted the hilltops, Emily came inside with red cheeks and a bundle of sage. We'll burn some in the hearth, she said. It's tradition, to bless the home before winter takes hold. Samuel took it from her hands gently. You believe in that? I believe in honoring what's kept me alive. That night, the fire glowed with the scent of sage. The children lay curled under quilts. Emily leaned into Samuel's shoulder, and he rested his cheek on her hair. They didn't speak. Words weren't needed. What they had built together was real. The snow thickened. The creak behind the house slowed. Samuel tightened the saddle cinch as Emily stepped out with a wrapped bundle in her arms. Take the rye bread to the tanners, she said. They haven't had much since the hail ruined their harvest. He secured the bundle. I'll be back before dusk. She nodded, her eyes lingering a little longer than needed. He touched her cheek and kissed her forehead before riding off. Inside, Emily prepared stew. The house creaked in the cold, wood popping in the stove. That afternoon, the Braddock boy arrived to help Jacob with the animals. Emily gave him soup and asked him to stay near the kids while she checked the cellar. She lit a lantern and stepped into the cool, earth-scented space. As she sorted apples in jars, she smiled, thinking of Samuel and how he always saved the plum jam for the last bite. Upstairs, the door creaked open. Too soon. She froze. Footsteps. She climbed the stairs slowly. A man stood in the entryway, tall, snow on his coat, his face worn and mean. Merritt, he said, looking for Carter. He's not here, Emily said, steady. You ran out on family. I came to collect what's owed. There's nothing owed. He stepped closer. You think a piece of paper makes that true? Emily's eyes flicked toward the back room where the children were. Her voice never wavered. You need to leave. He grabbed her arm, but the front door burst open. Snow blew in, and Samuel stood there, rifle across his chest. Let her go. Merritt dropped his hand. I didn't come to fight. You already did, Samuel said. Leave now. If I see you here again, I won't speak first. Merritt hesitated, then spat on the floor and walked out. Samuel shut the door. Emily stood frozen. He crossed to her, cupped her face. You all right? She nodded, but her breath trembled. He won't come back. No, Samuel said. He won't. The snow kept falling for days after Merritt's final visit. It covered the fence posts and blanketed the fields, but inside the farmhouse, the warmth returned. Not just from the fire, but from the quiet understanding that they had faced the storm and come through it together. Emily no longer moved cautiously through the house. Her steps were confident. She began sewing curtains for the front windows and teaching Sarah to knead dough with her small, flour-dusted hands. Jacob brought in firewood without being asked and carved a wooden spoon just for her. On the handle, he'd written, "Miss Emily." Samuel noticed everything, but said little. He didn't need to. His presence was steady, grounding, and the house felt whole again. One evening, as the wind howled outside, Emily stood beside the hearth, tying her braid with a blue ribbon. Samuel watched her from his chair. "You've brought color back to this place," he said. She smiled. "You brought me here." "I've been thinking," he continued. "We've built a home, a life, one that matters." Emily turned, her eyes searching his. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying, let's make it official. Not for appearances, not for protection. For us." She blinked, a tear forming. "You're sure?" "I've never been more sure." From the drawer beside him, Samuel pulled a small velvet box. Inside were 2 silver bands, simple but solid. "I had these made a while ago," he said. "Didn't know when the right time would come." Emily stepped forward, touched the rings with trembling fingers. "It's now." They married on a bright winter morning. No priest, no crowd, just them, the children, and the land they had made their own. Sarah wore a flower crown made of pine needles and red berries. Jacob read a passage from the Bible, his voice steady. Emily wore a dress she'd stitched herself, and the same blue ribbon in her hair. They said their vows beneath the oak tree behind the barn, the branches bare but proud. Afterward, they ate bread, jam, and warm cider. The children laughed and danced in the snow. That night, Samuel and Emily stood at the kitchen window, watching the frost form on the glass. "Do you think the past will ever stop trying to find us?" she asked. He placed a hand on her shoulder. "It already has. It lost." Spring came slowly that year. The river thawed, the fields turned green again. Emily began teaching reading classes to children from nearby farms. The kitchen became a little schoolhouse in the mornings, filled with scribbled letters, chalk dust, and laughter. Samuel built a bench under the maple tree so they could sit together in the evenings. He whittled her name into the wood with care. They planted a garden side by side, tomatoes, beans, and a patch of mint. Emily hung wild herbs to dry above the stove, just like her mother once had. She still hummed sometimes, but now it was out of contentment. One afternoon, a letter arrived from the county courthouse. Samuel opened it and read slowly. Then, with a quiet breath, handed it to Emily. The charges filed by Merritt had been dismissed. "Insufficient evidence," the letter read. "No legal standing. Case closed." Emily sat down at the table, the letter resting in her lap. She stared at it for a long while. Then she looked up, tears rolling down her cheeks, but they were not tears of fear. "I'm free," she whispered. "For real." Samuel kneeled beside her, taking her hand. "You always were. But now, the world agrees." Years passed. The children grew. Jacob learned to ride and build. Sarah learned to sing and read poetry aloud under the maple tree. The farm flourished. Life was never easy, but it was full. Emily never forgot where she had come from, but she no longer feared it. The past had shaped her, but it didn't own her. In the quiet of their home, with wind in the fields and love in every corner, she had found something rare: peace. One golden evening, as the sun dipped below the hills, Samuel and Emily walked hand in hand along the edge of their land. Their hair had grayed, their steps had slowed, but their hearts beat steady. "You know," Samuel said, "I thought I was saving you that day in Harlan Creek." Emily smiled. "You were." He looked at her, eyes soft. "But the truth is, you saved me too." They stood in silence, watching the sky turn pink and gold. Love doesn't always come dressed in poetry. Sometimes it arrives quietly, in a moment of compassion, in the warmth of a shared morning, in the resilience of two people who refuse to give up on each other. If this story touched your heart, share your thoughts in the comments. And if you believe in second chances, follow our channel, because there are still stories like this waiting to be told. Simple, true, and full of hope.